Hey everybody, this is James Lindsay and you are listening to New Discourses Bullets, where I give a short bullet point-like summary of a single topic relevant to woke Marxism so we can defeat it. And some of these podcasts are not about topics from woke Marxism, they are about our side. They're about activism against woke Marxism, how to organize, how to strategize, what you need to do. I've done a few like this. There'll be a few more coming. Today's is actually going to be about applying the Pareto principle to make your work more efficient. I want us to be able to fight back more efficiently. So it doesn't matter if you're in a big organization or a small organization, the Pareto principle is pretty much as close to a law of nature as there is. But the fact is that if you're a grassroots activist or a normal everyday parent getting involved, or somebody trying to stick it to your local politics or get involved in that, get involved in state politics, especially from the grassroots angle, you need to know this. That said, I'll just remind you, everybody needs to understand this. And it doesn't just apply to activism, by the way. If you just happened upon this podcast or if you have other things happening in your life, the Pareto principle virtually always applies. And so the colloquial name for the Pareto principle is the 80-20 rule, which says that if you want to figure out where stuff's getting done in your organization, it doesn't split 50-50. The top 50% do 50% of the work, the bottom 50% do 50% of the work. That's not true. It turns out that 80% of the work is being done by the top 20% of the people. 80% of the impact that you're doing is achieved by the most effective 20% of your projects, as well as the most effective 20% of your people. It cuts the other way as well, though. 20% of the top 20%, the top quintile of your output requires 80% of your work and attention. So the Pareto principle is an extremely important rule if you want to organize efficiently, because a problem that I see, especially with grassroots activists, is getting tied up, putting tons and tons of effort into kind of the lagging set. I don't want to be too rude about that bottom 80%, and especially the bottom 80 of the bottom 80. But the fact of the matter is that we spend way too much time going along and trying to encourage people or get people who are going to be extremely low output, or dumping a ton of time and effort into low impact projects that come across our desk, because they feel like they have to be done, or because we feel like everybody needs to be brought along, when in fact it would be far more worthwhile to remember that we have to put 80% of our effort into the top 20% of performance, no matter what, whether that's people or whether that's projects, if we want to be effective following the Pareto principle, which applies. Now, to be real clear, these 80 and 20 percentages are estimates. In reality, everything's a little bit statistical. So 80-20 is kind of a rule of thumb. In practice, it might, depending on your organization, if you have a kind of more diffuse organization, or one that's filled with kind of more amateur participants, it might actually be a 90-10 rule, which makes it even harder on the people in leadership. If, however, you have kind of a highly motivated, highly effective, more seasoned group, it might cut closer to 70-30. But as a rule of thumb, it's probably, not knowing much else, close to 80-20, maybe 75-25. And now, what you probably don't realize about the Pareto principle is that the Pareto principle applies within the Pareto principle's two groups. In other words, it applies fractally. So within that top 20%, there's an 80-20 rule. Within that bottom 80%, there's also an 80-20 rule. And then within the top part of that, there's another one, and so on and so forth, all the way up and down the scale. And that's too complicated and baroque for normal people, unless you have an absolutely huge organization with a lot of talent at your hand, thousands of people at your disposal. It's not really relevant to do this more than twice. But this idea that you need to be putting 80% of your effort into the top 20% of your production is extremely important, and it should apply twice. So what does that mean? First of all, let's just talk turkey about the 80-20 part. If you are dedicating 80% of your effort to the 80% of your projects and people that are not particularly productive, what you're doing is you're spinning your wheels. And the problem with spinning your wheels like that is it's really frustrating. It's exhausting. It's the kind of stuff where you feel like you want to quit. Whereas on the other hand, 80% of your impact is coming from that top quintile, that top 20% of your performance, whether again, people or projects. So your top 20% most important projects And most motivated people are shouldering 80% of the work, but they're also producing 80% of the outcome that you're after. Turns out when you're dumping your energy into stuff that produces, it builds momentum, it builds energy. It's not frustrating, it's motivating. Success builds on success. And so when you have your energy output mismatched, you're going to get frustrated, exhausted, burned out. When you have your energy output matched correctly, you're going to get kind of momentum building a momentum, and it's more encouraging. It's still a lot of work, but it feels more fulfilling. You feel like you're making progress. It's more exciting. And the people involved at every level actually end up having a greater positive experience. Whereas if you're in that mismatched energy situation, everybody starts getting dragged down. Leadership in general comes from the head. So if you're in kind of a leadership role or you're assuming a leadership role, you need to understand that you've got to be able to delegate your energies and your people according to this rule, applied not once, but twice. And here's what I mean. So let's say that you have an organization of 100 people. That'll make it really easy. We really should do 50, but I don't want you to get lost on the numbers because a lot of your grassroots groups are about 50. Just cut all the numbers in half. So if you have an organization of 100 people, the top 20 of them, in terms of how effective they are going to achieve 80% of your results. So that means really 80% of your resources should be going into them. Only 20% of your resources should be going into the 80% that are less effective, the bottom 4 quintiles. But within that group of 20, all is not equal. 20% of them, and for those of you who remember your math, 20% of 20% is 4%. The top 4 people are actually producing, if we do the math, 64% of your outcome. Now think about that for a second. Think about organizations that you've worked with. Let's say that it's a 50-person organization. I'm going to cut all the numbers in half. You have a 50-person organization and it's trying to achieve something. Maybe it's your local chapter of, whatever, Moms for Liberty or whatever. You had about 50 people is trying to achieve something. How true does this ring that about 10 people in the organization do almost everything is what it feels like? And then really it's just 2 people that are really holding the thing together and driving the ship. That should ring pretty true because those are the numbers of the Pareto principle applied twice in that top bracket for a group of 50 people. So if you have a group of 100 people, you have basically 20 people who are highly effective members of the organization, 80 who are kind of coming along, and 4 who are really the drivers of the ship, the real captains of the program. And what I wanted to tell you is that if you are in the leadership role, you need to be putting close to 65% of your effort into those people and their projects, as well as for you, your projects also the ones that cut in the top 4% or 5% of the most important or most impactful actually projects. That's where you need to put 64% of your energy. The remaining 16% that are in that top 20, so the remaining 16 people out of that 100, get about 16% of your energy because that's what's left out of the 80% you're giving to that top bracket, after you take out the 64 that goes to your captains. Okay? And captains here, really, I want you to think less in terms of people and more in terms of projects. The part with the people, what I really want you to think about is that the people, I want you to understand why so few people are so highly productive in your group and not get frustrated by it and learn to work within that and amplify its effect, rather than get frustrated. But with your projects, those top 4 out of 100 projects are the ones that deserve 64% of your effort. If we just follow the strict numbers, it's easier to say your most important 5%, your most impactful 5% gets 65% of your effort. The next 15% or so only gets 15% of your effort. The next 15 below that, so now we're dipping into the second quintile, only gets 15% again. And then the bottom 65%, the least valuable of these are your stupid tasks that come up all the time. Unless you're extremely effective on social media, it's probably a lot of your social media activity. Unless you have a high performance social media account and profile, it's probably all of the stuff that you do that feels like work, that's kind of like grinding stuff. You've got to reserve only 5% of your effort for 65% of your tasks that are your lowest output performers. If you stick to this rule, you will actually find yourself producing more, having better momentum, and if you're operating within a group, having a greater amount of success and positivity and forward movement momentum in that group. Now, and this is, like I said, it's as close to a fuzzy law of nature as you kind of get. So what that means is people who accord themselves with laws of nature will do better, and people who try to fight against laws of nature will do worse. So if you're spending all your time trying to convince people who don't want to do anything but drag their feet to stop dragging their feet, maybe it's time for you to listen to Jesus in Matthew 10:14 and shake the dust off your feet. It's time for you to not dump huge reservoirs of your effort into that and to put more of that energy into the people and the projects that are making the biggest difference for you. As far as people go, those 4 at the top are your captains, and they get the same thing underneath them. If you're putting energy into that, they should be putting their energy into the people, channeling your effort and channeling their own capacity downward. And then what you're going to end up with is a highly effective hierarchy working in your organization. So you want to find those people and nourish those people with 65% of the top 5%. Get 65% of your help, your attention, questions answered, your prioritization, and then encourage them to do the same thing with the people that are coming and talking to them. You want that kind of hierarchical structure. If those 4 or 5 people are your captains, you want those 4 or 5 people to be acting like captains. Then that next group, you can call them lieutenants, you can call the next one sergeants, and the last one's privates, whatever you want, however military baroque you want to get with this. But that's beside the point. What you want to be doing is allocating your effort and resources where it counts the most. And the 80-20 rule tells you where it counts. 80% of your energy should be going into the top 20% of your effective output, which means 64 to 65% of your energy should be going in the top 4 to 5% of your effective output. And a lot of people don't think like that. So what you need to do practically is you need to think, who are the people who are very effective, and how do I contribute more energy to supporting them and less energy to the people who are not as productive? How do I reprioritize to support my captains, basically? And in terms of projects, you need to go through all the different projects that you kind of got going on. Sit down one afternoon and make a list. Here's all the stuff I'm working on. What's the impact of this going to look like? How much work is it going to take? Whatever. Go through it. And then literally prioritize like you're making a budget of your energy and your time and your resources. I'm going to give a lot more time. For me, I think books turned to be very high impact. I'm going to give a lot of time to that. I know that when I do kind of explanatory threads on social media and or turn those into essays, that has a high level of impact. So I'm going to put effort into that. I also know that when I just go and kind of spar on social media, I have a small group of people who are thrilled by it, but most people don't like it. And it doesn't achieve very much, honestly. I get to pretend I'm working when really what I'm doing is screwing off, laying around in that bottom 65%. This shouldn't be getting any more than 5% of my energy. Yeah, blow off some steam a little bit. It's 5% of your productive time, or it's put into your unproductive time, but learn to not confuse the two. You have to figure out what it is for you. Is it advocacy? Is it organizing? Is it getting people together? Is it getting them to go do something like show up to a vote, to show up to a meeting, to testify, to organize their testimony, to learn the fundamentals of producing testimony, whatever it happens to be. There are lots and lots and lots of skills. You have to sit down and say, well, what are my tasks? And then if it's what can I delegate to my captains, what do I delegate to my captains? They get to apply the same rules for themselves at that point, because the Pareto principle is fractal like that. And then you need to make sure that you start prioritizing your energy according to that rule, that the top 5%, it's like the numbers are 5, 15, 15, and 65, and your effort goes the other way, 65, 15, 15, 5. And so you've really got to start splitting your time and energy into that. Just think about that though. The top 5% or so of your projects get 2/3 of your effort if you want to be effective. The entire next third gets less than 1/3 of your effort. And then only a little fraction is left for the entire, whatever that works out to. I'm a mathematician, just over 60%. It's almost 65% at the bottom. Just think about that. Are you prioritizing yourself according to this rule? If you are not, then you should. Think through your tasks, think through what causes impact, think through what kinds of things make a difference, and then think about what things you're getting bogged down into. And at least, maybe those middle parts are harder to figure out, but at least figure out what your top 5 and your bottom 65 are and allocate your energy appropriately. It will make a huge difference in the amount of impact that you and your organizations are able to make out in the world if you stop and think about how to organize and prioritize all of your effort. And like I said, it's a law of nature. So if you go with it, you win. And if you fight against it, you're going to lose.